to bring those children down here to London in all that hoo-ha. I just don't know how you...
And those sort of observations are critical to me. I mean, I see. I'm grateful because you've come together as a group. Inside the royal palace, a sad moment was taking place as Princess Anne quietly said her final goodbye. Loyal staff, many of whom had worked with her for years, cried openly. There were whispers about a secret letter from the Queen, a hidden journal, and a choice that could shake the royal family. But what really made Princess Anne walk away from everything? Join us as we reveal the emotional truth behind Princess Anne's departure. Princess Anne's silent exit. There was no big goodbye, no cameras, no waving from a balcony, just a quiet morning in Edinburgh, and Princess Anne was gone. Without a word to the public, the most dependable member of the royal family slipped away from the home she had lived in for decades. Loyal staff, many of whom had served her for over 20 years, were left standing in silence, shocked and teary-eyed. She wasn't just our boss, one longtime housekeeper whispered through tears. She was family, but this wasn't just a house move. It felt like something much bigger, an ending, a quiet, emotional farewell that left more questions than answers. No press release, no farewell speech, and yet, behind closed doors, something powerful happened. Just before stepping into her car, Anne handed her private secretary a plain, unmarked envelope. Inside was a short, handwritten note. "You have been my home." Just 6 words, but they said everything she didn't. In her private study, tucked away in a drawer no one had opened in weeks, sat a small, worn leather journal. It wasn't filled with royal documents or official letters, just pages and pages of her private thoughts, written over many years. Palace insiders say Anne left only one instruction before she left. The journal was to go straight to her trusted aide. No guards, no palace interference, just one person, one delivery. What was written inside has reportedly sent quiet shockwaves through the royal halls. Each page was more than just a memory. It was raw, honest, emotional. There were reflections about life inside the palace, moments of loyalty, yes, but also frustration and pain. A growing feeling that monarchy she had served so faithfully was beginning to change into something she no longer recognized. One line stood out more than any other. The day everything changed. I knew I couldn't stay. Those closest to her believed that day came shortly after the death of Queen Elizabeth in 2022. Though Anne never openly criticized the new royal leadership, her journal revealed quiet doubts. She didn't write with anger, but with care. She didn't name names often, but when she did, it mattered. Her entries spoke of private conversations, disagreements, and traditions being pushed aside for appearances. She was loyal, one aide said, but she wasn't blind. Then came the most secret part of all. Inside the journal was a sealed letter, written by Queen Elizabeth herself before she passed, and entrusted to Anne alone. No one knew it existed. It had never been mentioned, not even to staff. But in her journal, Anne wrote one haunting sentence. "The Queen gave me the truth. Now I must protect it." Suddenly, her quiet departure wasn't just personal. It was something bigger, something that might shake the very foundations of the royal family. Because whatever the Queen had written, and whatever Anne now carried, it changed everything. And the journal wasn't the only clue. According to insiders, the real shift in Anne began long before she left Edinburgh. Why had the famously calm and steady princess walked away from the place she once called her second home? Let's find out. The feelings of quietness. Just a few weeks after Queen Elizabeth's funeral in September 2022, something happened behind the palace doors that, according to insiders, changed everything. It took place during a high-level meeting held in one of the royal residences. The room was filled with the most trusted advisors, senior staff, and King Charles himself. Princess Anne sat quietly among them, listening carefully. The subject of the meeting was the future of the monarchy. How it should look, how it should change, and how it could stay relevant in a world that was quickly moving on. For nearly 3 hours, ideas were discussed and debated. They talked about modernizing the royal image, reaching younger generations, and rethinking the roles of the key members of the royal family. But one suggestion stood out from the rest, making Kate Middleton, the Princess of Wales, more visible. Some advisors believed Kate represented everything the monarchy needed to survive and thrive: calmness, dignity, elegance, and a sense of modern grace. In their view, Kate could connect with the public in a way that Queen Camilla never truly could. Princess Anne remained silent and watchful, as she often did in such meetings. But then King Charles spoke, and his words changed the tone in the room. He firmly pushed back against the idea. Charles made it clear that Camilla would remain at the heart of the monarchy. He would not allow her to be overshadowed, not by Kate, not by anyone. His tone left little room for discussion. The energy in the room shifted. What had started as a strategic talk suddenly felt like a power struggle. Someone in the room later recalled that Anne's face showed nothing, her expression unreadable. But then the conversation moved to something even more sensitive. A suggestion to quietly step away from many of the charities and causes Queen Elizabeth had personally supported for decades. That was the moment Anne stood up. She didn't speak. Instead, she walked over to a nearby window and stood there, silent and still, gazing outside. For several minutes, nobody said a word. A heavy silence fell across the room. Later that evening, back in her private quarters in Edinburgh, Anne opened her journal and wrote an entry that those close to her would never forget. One line stood out: the day everything changed. After that, things slowly began to shift. Anne started pulling away from the spotlight. One by one, appointments were canceled. Public events she would once attend without hesitation were suddenly removed from her schedule. The woman, who had carried so many royal duties with quiet strength and zero fuss, began to fade into the background. Those closest to her say it wasn't about ambition or jealousy. It wasn't about wanting more power or recognition. It was about something deeper. Watching the monarchy, which she had served so loyally, begin to drift away from the values and quiet dignity her mother had spent a lifetime building. This wasn't just sadness. It was heartbreak. And once that break happened, there was no going back. Anne didn't make speeches. She didn't cause a scene. She simply began to disappear. What then truly caused Anne to retreat so deeply into herself? Let's take a closer look. Separated crown. To the public, everything still seemed perfect. A royal family standing strong and united behind the palace gates. But behind those grand doors, things were beginning to fall apart. Anne and Charles, once a close brother and sister who had grown up together under the same royal roof, were slowly drifting away from each other after the death of Queen Elizabeth. Their bond, once strong, had begun to crack. They no longer saw the future of the monarchy in the same way. Anne believed in keeping things quiet, traditional, and respectful, just like their mother had. She saw the royal family as a steady rock, something that shouldn't change too much. But Charles had different ideas. He wanted to leave a mark, to build a legacy that would be remembered. He cared deeply about how the public saw him, and what kind of king he would be known as. Their disagreements became even more intense when it came to two women, Camilla and Catherine. People close to the family said that Anne believed their mother, Queen Elizabeth, had quietly placed her trust in Catherine. To Anne, Catherine represented calm, dignity, and a stable future for the royal family. But Charles, instead of honoring that unspoken trust, gave Camilla a much larger role. He pushed her forward into the spotlight, and that decision cut deep for Anne. When Anne tried to speak up and share her concerns, she was told to let it go, that the past was the past. But Anne couldn't let it go. Her mind kept going back to something their mother had once whispered to her. In a quiet moment, protect the crown from pride, not from change. Then, months later, something unexpected happened. A sealed letter, written by Queen Elizabeth during her final year, was found. It had been meant only for Anne. The words were simple, but powerful. Those who read it said it wasn't an order. It was more like gentle advice, a warning given with love and wisdom. The message was clear. The crown must always stay balanced. It should never tip too far in one direction, not even in the name of progress or pride. For Anne, reading that letter was like hearing her mother's voice one last time. And in that moment, she knew deep down, the balance had already been lost. What is the content of the letter? Let's find out. Queen's hidden letter. When that hidden letter finally surfaced, everything that had been quietly bubbling under the surface could no longer be ignored. It wasn't gossip from the palace staff or a rumor from the press. It was real. A few weeks after Queen Elizabeth's funeral in 2022, Princess Anne was sorting through her late mother's private things. That's when she found it. A handwritten letter, carefully sealed and tucked away in a leather pouch marked with the Queen's gold initials. The ink had faded slightly with time, but the words were clear, strong and full of purpose. This wasn't a letter meant for the public or to be stored in royal archives. It was personal, meant for a particular moment and just a handful of trusted eyes. The Queen had given it to Anne, her most loyal child, because she trusted her to know when the time was right to share it. Anne didn't gasp or cry when she read the letter. Instead, she sat in still silence, as if she had always known this moment would come. The Queen had spoken not through an official speech, but in her own quiet, steady handwriting, and in that letter, there was no mention of Charles, nothing about Camilla, just one name, Catherine. To the Queen, Catherine was the one the monarchy needed. She praised her calm nature, her quiet strength, her discipline, and her deep sense of duty. Do not measure her by title, the Queen had written, but by the calm she brings to every storm. It wasn't just a message, it was a vision, a new kind of monarchy, one based on character, not just bloodlines. When Anne finally decided to reveal the letter, it wasn't in a grand hall or with royal advisors. It was a quiet, closed-door meeting with only William and Charles present. The room turned tense as Anne gently placed the letter on the table. William sat frozen, stunned. Charles, who had always believed his mother supported his reign, looked shaken. One insider described the moment as a thunderclap inside the palace. For Anne, the letter confirmed her deepest worry. Her mother had seen the cracks, the scandals, the struggles, the fading trust, and she had chosen Catherine as the one steady anchor the monarchy could depend on. Not because she was born for it, but because she had earned it through strength and grace. In that small, silent room, filled with memories, truth, and unspoken emotion, Anne's burden was finally lifted. She had delivered her mother's final message, and with it, a quiet but powerful shift had begun, one that could change the future of the crown forever. The Queen's choice. This wasn't gossip, and it wasn't a rumor. It was real. A handwritten letter, carefully folded and tucked inside a leather pouch, found shortly after Queen Elizabeth II passed away. A little faded, but unmistakably personal. It was Princess Anne who discovered it, going through her mother's belongings. Known for her calm strength and loyalty, Anne wasn't easily shaken, but what she read in that letter caught her breath. It didn't talk about Charles. It didn't even mention Camilla. Instead, the Queen wrote only about one person, Catherine. She praised Catherine for her quiet strength, her grace under pressure, and her ability to stay calm and committed while others were caught in drama. The letter wasn't meant to be seen by the world. It wasn't for praise or headlines. It was honest, private, a glimpse into what the Queen really thought about the future of the monarchy, not just based on bloodlines, but on character. Anne didn't rush to act. Instead, she made a quiet trip to Sandringham to speak with the one person who might understand the letter's deeper meaning. Reverend Thomas, her mother's longtime private chaplain, sitting together by the fire, away from cameras and duty. Anne read him the letter, and he nodded. He'd already known. That summer of 2022, during the Queen's final days at Balmoral, she had spoken to him about her true concerns, not about keeping traditions alive, but about the monarchy losing its meaning. What we model matters more than what we wear, she had told him. She had great respect for Anne's strength, but in Catherine, she saw herself a steady spirit, calm and devoted to service. "We'll need calm waters, not crashing waves," the Queen had said. These weren't just thoughtful reflections. They were quiet warnings, and Anne understood this letter wasn't meant to be hidden away. It was meant to make a difference. So one quiet evening at Windsor, behind closed doors and without staff or press, Anne met with Charles and William. She said very little. There was no anger, no arguing, only a single letter placed gently on the polished table in front of them. Charles's jaw clenched as he read. William stayed silent. Anne, steady as always, simply said, "She trusted me to show you this. She wanted you to know, before it was too late." It wasn't a speech. It wasn't a royal announcement, but something changed in that room. Something important. It was the beginning of a shift, not in titles or traditions, but in trust. As the letter sat between them, its message filled the room, quiet and powerful, like the last breath of a long reign. And just like that, the Queen's true heir of the heart stepped forward, not wearing a crown, but carrying her legacy. King Charles and Camilla's response. Charles had waited his entire life, more than 70 years, to finally sit on the throne. So when he received a private letter from the Queen shortly before her death, he expected something powerful, something that passed the crown to him with warmth and certainty. But what he got instead felt more like a cold dismissal than a heartfelt blessing. He didn't show his anger in public. No cameras caught him yelling. No headlines shouted of royal rage. But behind the tall, silent walls of Windsor Castle, the truth played out far more dramatically. Princess Anne, always calm and composed, had brought him the letter. She placed it gently on the polished table and read its contents aloud. Her voice was steady, but Charles, he couldn't hold himself together. As the words sank in, his face darkened and his hand slammed down on the table with a loud crack. "This changes nothing," he snapped, his voice tight with emotion. But deep inside, he knew it did. Everything had changed. Anne didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice or even flinch. Her response was cool, firm, and devastatingly clear. "It wasn't your decision to make." What hit Charles the hardest wasn't just what the letter said, but what it didn't say. Camilla's name was missing. Whether it was an intentional snub or simply an oversight, the absence was impossible to ignore. After all the years Charles had spent defending Camilla, carefully guiding her back into the public's favor, and finally naming her queen consort. Now, at this crucial moment, the Queen's final words mentioned only one woman by name, Catherine, not in terms of title, but in terms of trust. And in Queen Elizabeth's world, trust was everything. Camilla didn't say anything after the letter was read, but she didn't have to. Her silence was thunderous. One royal aide described her as stunned, her face frozen in shock, like a mask she couldn't remove. Just hours after that tense family meeting, she quietly packed a bag and left Windsor for Clarence's house. She stayed hidden away for days, not wanting to be seen, not wanting to be questioned. According to a close insider, Camilla felt completely erased, as if the Queen had brushed aside her years of effort, her transformation, her place beside Charles. Anne, however, wasn't surprised. Her relationship with Camilla had always been formal, polite, but never close. Privately, she had long questioned Camilla's growing presence in the family. "It's not about whether she means well," Anne once confided. "It's about where she came from," and that still echoes. As Charles leaned more heavily on Camilla in recent years, Anne quietly stepped back, and William stood caught in the middle. On one hand, he remained loyal to his father. On the other hand, he couldn't help but admire his wife, Catherine, who, despite all the tension and noise, never once tried to make the moment about herself. The Queen's letter was written with good intentions, filled with hope for the future. But instead of bringing peace, it uncovered a deep emotional storm. It didn't just name a future leader. It ripped open old wounds, exposed hidden resentments, and shook the very foundation of the royal family. But what happens when the future king starts to feel overshadowed by the very woman helping shape that future? Let's find out. William's dilemma and Anne's final goodbye. William had always understood what it meant to serve. From a young age, he was trained to follow in his father's footsteps, a future king raised under the heavy expectations of Buckingham Palace. But nothing could have prepared him for the moment Anne read those words out loud. Catherine is the crown's future. He had never wanted the spotlight. Neither had Catherine. For years, they had supported each other, working together in service to their family and their country. But Anne's calm voice reminded him of something important. Your role still matters, but hers leads it. This wasn't about stepping aside. It was about stepping together. The message wasn't about division. It was about growth. And William had to ask himself, could he rise alongside a future where Catherine wasn't just his partner, but the guiding light of the monarchy, far from the public eye? Anne was already saying her goodbyes in quiet ways in Edinburgh. No cameras, no speeches, just small heartfelt gestures. a photo signed for a gardener's son, a thank you note to a housekeeper who had worked with her for good 15 years. She didn't need to explain her departure. Her silence said it all. Behind her calm smile was a woman who had seen many changes and knew when something important was ending. When the palace gates closed behind her for the last time, her staff didn't cheer or wave. They stood silently, shoulder to shoulder, tears in their eyes. They weren't just saying goodbye to a royal. They were mourning the end of a way of life, one built on respect, routine, and quiet strength. Anne's leaving wasn't just about her. It marked the slow fading of a royal style where dignity came before drama. And while her loyal team grieved, Buckingham Palace was getting ready for the storm that might follow. Anne left without fanfare, but her absence made the palace uneasy. No headlines announced her departure, yet inside those royal walls, her silence sent a clear message. For decades, she had been a steady presence, and now that presence was gone. Her leaving didn't need words. It made powerful people nervous on its own. Those who worked closely with her felt the shift immediately. Meetings grew more tense. Everyday messages were reviewed more carefully. The Queen's earlier letter had already stirred the waters, but Anne's quiet exit turned ripples into waves. At the center of this quiet change were two forces: King Charles, holding on to tradition, and Catherine, rising quietly as a new kind of royal symbol, modern, steady, and privately supported by both the Queen and Anne. No one called it a power struggle, but the shift could be felt. Anne hadn't just left her role. She started something the monarchy couldn't ignore. Her exit, Catherine's rise, and the quiet changes inside the palace revealed a deeper transformation. With Anne's strong but silent presence now gone, the big question became clear: not just who would take her place, but how the monarchy would move forward without her. For over 50 years, Anne was the backbone of royal duty, not because she sought attention, but because she showed up again and again. Over 400 engagements a year, every year. She made it look easy. Her way was never flashy, just focused on duty. While King Charles holds on to old traditions, the real energy seems to be forming around Catherine. So, what do you think about Princess Anne's sudden decision to walk away? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Don't forget to like and subscribe.